Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, Episode 10, Artsakh, or Nagorno Karabakh. Artsakh is a country that is closely related to Armenia and is generally seen as outsiders as being an Armenian puppet state. So, if you haven't listened to the Armenia episode, I would highly recommend you stop and go listen to it right now. Artsakh itself is located in the Caucasus, in a region known as Nagorno Karabakh, or Mountainous Karabakh. Karabakh itself means black garden, and is a much wider region of the Caucasus. Nagorno Karabakh is considered by the vast majority of countries to be a part of Azerbaijan. However, the majority of the region is controlled by the Artsakh and Armenian army. Most countries do not recognize Artsakh as an actual state, with most countries considering the territory to be occupied by Armenia. Artsakh's territory borders Azerbaijan to the northeast, Armenia to the southwest, and Aran to the southeast. The entire country is mostly mountainous, similar to Armenia next to it. Artsakh has a fairly small population, with only 150,000 people living within its borders. Artsakh demographically is very similar to Armenia. 99% of the country is ethnically Armenian, with smaller minorities of Russians, Ukrainians, and Yazidis. The official language of the country is Armenian, which is spoken by the vast majority of the population, and religiously, most belong to the Armenian Apostolic Church, with smaller groups of Catholics and Protestant Christians. Artsakh's history closely follows Armenian history. It was a part of the Kingdom of Urartu, fell under Persian control, was a part of the ancient Kingdom of Armenia, and was several times invaded by Rome and the Parthians, before becoming Christianized and falling under the Bagratid dynasty in the Middle Ages. During the Bagratid Kingdom, it would be ruled by a noble dynasty known as the Kachyan. They would form a state known as the Kingdom of Artsakh. This kingdom would still, however, be under Bagratid control and would be considered a province with a large degree of autonomy. This kingdom would fall under Byzantine control before the region would be invaded by the Seljuk Turks in 1071. The Turks that invaded would depopulate much of the region, with many Armenians choosing to flee to Sicilia. Many Turks would intermingle with some of the remaining Armenians and other local peoples in the region, thus creating the start of the Azeri culture. These Azeris were mostly Muslim and spoke a Turkic language. Many would settle in what would become Azerbaijan, northwestern Iran, and the Karabakh region. Now, finding out the demographics of the region, both during the Middle Ages and even up to the modern period, is complicated and often clouded with nationalist bias. Many Armenians would argue the region retained its American character from antiquity up to today, while Azeris would argue that the region after the 1100s had a more Azeri and Muslim culture. The kingdom would, despite these massive changes around it, remain. It would fall under Georgian control starting in the early 1200s, before coming under Mongol control in the mid-1200s. The kingdom would be dissolved, although the Kachyan would continue to rule as semi-independent rulers of the region under the Mongols and several Turkic kingdoms. During this time, Armenian churches and monasteries were built throughout the region. In 1603, under Iranian rule, the region would be divided into 5 Armenian principalities known as Mekeldoms. These Mekeldoms would be largely autonomous with very little Persian interference, allowing feudal society to remain static for centuries. Importantly, many Armenians would see these Mekeldoms as being the last remaining holders of Armenian sovereignty during the early modern period. In 1747, the Persian Shah, Nader Shah, was assassinated. His death created instability across Persia, as his cruel reign had both expanded the Persian Empire, but also created domestic instability. In an attempt to secure his rule in the Caucasus, the new Persian Shah decided to create a new entity in the Nagorno Karabakh region, known as the Karabakh Khanate. This Khanate would be subservient to the Persian Shah, while also holding authority over the Armenian Mekeldoms and being largely autonomous from both. The Khanate was mainly led by local Azeri nobles. The Khanate would have to deal with and fight off invasions and raids from other semi-independent Khanates during this time. The capital of Artsakh, Stepanakert, would also be founded during the late 1700s. In 1806, the region would fall under Russian control. The Khanate and the Mekeldoms would continue to exist under Russian rule until 1822, when both were abolished, coming under centralized Russian rule. A census taken in 1836 across the entire Karabakh region found that 65% of the population were Azeri, or as they were often referred to by the Russians, Tartars, while 35% were Armenian. Most Armenians were found to be concentrated in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, where it is believed they made up a majority, at least according to pro-Armenian records. Both sides in the Nagorno-Karabakh dispute will claim this census proves their side deserves the region, and quickly during Russian rule, ethnic tensions would increase. Now, these ethnic tensions probably weren't helped by the Russians. Russian authorities often use ethnic rivalries on its borders to assume control of the region and prevent popular multi-ethnic revolts against them. It's better to have them stab their neighbor and turn their anger against some farmer the next village over, rather than stab you, the occupier, and usually source of their troubles. During and even before World War I, pillaging and ethnic riots would regularly break out in the Karabakh region between Armenians and Azeris. As the war dragged on and Russia increasingly was forced to send more troops to the front, whether or not backwater regions like Karabakh were peaceful became less and less important to the Russians. After the Russian Revolution that removed the Tsar and the start of the Russian Civil War, Nagorno Karabakh would find itself a part of the Transcaucasian Federation before that broke up. From 1918 to 1921, it would find itself switching sides often, as Armenia and Azerbaijan both vied for control. The region would see even greater ethnic violence, and Nagorno-Karabakh would find itself as a no-man's land. Both Armenians and Azeris would try to set up local governments, only for them to either be driven off or dissolved due to infighting a short time later. At one point, even the British came in, hoping to take Azerbaijan to gain access to the oil fields of Baku. However, the British decide to focus on the new, less violent territories in Iraq and Mandatory Palestine, which I'm sure would never succumb to any kind of ethnic violence in the coming decades. Violence would continue until the Communist Red Army took the region in 1920. The Soviets, hoping to improve relations with Turkey, gave Azerbaijan the lion's share of the land fought over between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Azeris and the Turks had historically always been close with each other, and they hoped that by doing this they got Turkey to fall under the Soviet sphere of influence. Karabakh also just had a large Azeri population in general, and it did make a lot of sense to give large portions of the region to the Azeris. Thus the region fell under the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic. But within Nagorno-Karabakh, an autonomous oblast was set up, which included all the Armenian majority towns, allowing the Armenians a large degree of autonomy under their own affairs. This situation had the interesting effect of both annoying everyone, but also ending violence. Armenians were upset they had lost much of the region, but could be happy they got their own smaller region that could be used against the Azeris should they be disloyal to the Soviets. The Azeris, on the other hand, didn't like this pocket of Armenians within their territory, but they could be happy they received so much, and their state had grown. The region was peaceful for the rest of Soviet history, and Azeris and Armenians were for the most part friendly towards each other. More Azeris began to enter the region looking for work, and also encouraged by Azeri political leaders hoping to convert the region back into nominal Azerbaijan. In 1926, 10% of the autonomous oblast was Azeri, but by the end of the Soviet Union in 1989, 22% of the population was Azeri. In the 80s, as the Soviet Union began the policy of perestroika, or opening up, ethnic tensions that had been dormant for decades opened up again. Armenians began demanding that the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast be given back to Armenia, and riots and nationalistic violence increased. In 1988, the regional Soviet of the Oblast voted to be reunified with Armenia. While technically this was legal in the Soviet Union, the idea that any regions would actually vote on anything like this and separate from the Soviet-drawn borders was considered bourgeois heresy. Soviet and Azeri forces quickly began cracking down on any expressions of Armenian nationalism, as Armenians began arming themselves. With the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was clear war would come to the region, but attempts were still made to try and resolve the situation peacefully, and at first it seemed to maybe something could be worked out. In September, the Zelenovsky Communique was signed, with it promising disarmament, allowing refugees from both sides to return to their respective homes, and peacekeepers to enter the region. However, shelling from the Azeri side and the shoot-down of an Azeri military helicopter carrying several high-ranking Azeri officials ended any chance of peace. The helicopter shoot-down in particular has been the subject of conspiracies, with Russian agents or rogue generals from both sides being accused of being the culprits. Whatever happened, by 1992, the conflict would heat up. The armies at the start of the conflict looked fairly one-sided. Azerbaijan had more troops, more equipment left behind from the Soviets, and received foreign backing from Turkish nationalist and Muslim paramilitaries. However, Armenian troops had one thing most Azeris did not: experience. Many from the Armenian side were former veterans from the Soviet war in Afghanistan, and fully believed that if they lost the conflict, they and all Armenians in the region would be killed. The Azeris were historically considered untrustworthy by the Russians, due to their status as Muslims, and their connections with both Iran and Turkey. Many Azeris who were veterans didn't seek combat, instead relegated to logistical support roles. The Azeris, while receiving plenty of support from abroad, found themselves lacking help from one very important actor: the new Russian state. Russia, while not officially taking Armenia's position in the conflict, did give arms to the Armenians and put political pressure to prevent Turkey from invading Armenia. Russian forces were also accused of aiding Armenian forces in several battles. The Russians were believed to have done this to escalate tensions in the region, allowing them to maintain some influence over Armenian and Azerbaijani politics and aid their Christian brethren. Iran also provided support for the Armenians via supplying energy, and the Armenian diaspora helped send supplies, money, and put political pressure on American politicians to not support Azerbaijan. The war would start off with one of the most infamous events in Nagorno Karabakh's history, the massacre at Hojala. In the lead up to the conflict, the Azeri town of Hojala was used as a base to shell Stepanakert. The Armenian forces, wanting to stop the shelling, decided to blockade and then advance on the town in February 26, 1992. They quickly overwhelmed the Azeris defending the town and left a small corridor for which Azeri civilians could theoretically escape from. However, Armenian soldiers began firing on fleeing civilians, killing many. It's estimated around 161 to 613 civilians were killed. Today, it still remains a source of tension for Azeri and Armenian relations. Armenians began taking the offensive, taking several Azeri towns in early 1992. By June, the Azeris launched Operation Granolboy, taking half the autonomous oblast and almost breaking the Armenians. They would become exhausted and suffered heavy casualties, forcing them to lose much of the land they had just taken. 1993 would see the Armenians take the area between the autonomous oblast and Armenia, officially linking the two states up. By 1994, both sides exhausted from war would sign a ceasefire. The war would result in somewhere between 18 to 40,000 deaths on both sides, with the Azeri side suffering the most casualties. Many civilians had to flee their home. It is estimated around 750,000 Azeris fled their home in Nagorno Karabakh in Armenia, and were forced to become internally displaced refugees in Azerbaijan. Many still struggle today to find work and adjust to their new homes. The conflict and the military presence in the region hasn't gone away, however. Peace talks failed to produce any agreement that both sides could agree on. Several attempts have been made to try and resolve the conflict since the 90s, but all have failed for various reasons. The closest it ever came to being ended was in 1999, when the Armenian Prime Minister and the Azeri President agreed to allow for the return of refugees and have international peacekeepers come in. However, this all ended after the Armenian parliament shooting that I talked about in the last episode. Conflict will regularly flare up from time to time, often resulting in little to no change in territory and several from both sides dying. The latest of these incidents occurred in 2016 in what became known as the Four-Day War. Azeri forces managed to take 2,000 acres of land from Armenian forces, and it resulted in 200 to 2,000 soldiers dying on both sides. If you're wondering why there is such a large gap, it's because both sides claim they killed far more troops than the other side admits. These sporadic clashes are often framed this way, with neither side willing to admit a loss. Talking about Artsakh as a country is difficult. You may have noticed that I've been choosing to call the ethnic Armenian forces simply Armenian rather than say Armenian and Artsakhian. This is because Artsakh isn't really its own country. Like, Artsakh has its own government, president, army, and flag, but most people, including Armenians and Armenian politicians, see Artsakh and Armenia as being one and the same. Both countries are mostly Armenian, it's relatively easy to move to and from each country, and the Armenian dram is widely used as the currency in both countries. The first president of Artsakh, Robert Kochanian, would actually leave office to become Prime Minister of Armenia, and later its president. However, it should be noted for a brief period there was political discussion on if the country should become less reliant on Armenia. In 1991, Artur Makhchani became the first chairman of the Supreme Council, which pretty much means he was leader of the country. The faction he represented, the left-wing Armenian Revolutionary Federation, was opposed by the Armenian All-National Movement, which ruled Armenia at this time, and was led in Nagorno-Karabakh by Kochanian. Makhchani would be killed just a few months after he was elected, leading to Kochanian to eventually become president in 1994, bringing the two countries closer together. Today it is argued either his jealous wife killed him, or that Kochanian ordered the killing of Makhchani. So why aren't they just one country? Well, if Armenia officially recognizes Artsakh as a part of Armenia, it would essentially be making a statement that it had invaded Azerbaijan and took its territory. This would hurt Armenia abroad and would make it even more difficult for the country that is surrounded by hostile neighbors. However, if Artsakh is presented officially as its own state, they can more easily justify it to the rest of the world. It can be presented as a part of Azerbaijan that simply broke away from the country and is trying to assert its right of self-determination. Artsakh's existence is purely to avoid bad press on Armenia's part. Very few places recognize Artsakh as a real country. Only the unrecognized states of Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Transnistria have official relations with it. Not even Armenia will have official relations, as it will simply cause more problems. Interestingly enough, the US states of California, Colorado, Georgia, Hawaii, Louisiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, and Rhode Island all recognize Artsakh as an independent country, mainly due to pressure from Armenian communities within those states. Artsakh politically is transitioning into a semi-presidential republic, where the president holds the most power, but a prime minister also operates with their own cabinet. The current president is Artsakh Hartunia, who was elected it in 2020. He has worked to make university-level education free, promote economic development, and protect the culture of the Armenians. So why does Artsakh exist? Artsakh is a country that nobody wants to exist. Armenians want the country united with it to form Greater Armenia, and Azeris want it to be returned to them. And yet, it exists in order to maintain the status quo and general peace in the region. But even with this peace, its clear tension and violence lay just a few wrong moves away. Next week, we will go to the land down under with Australia. Prepare for deadly wildlife, criminals, silly accents, and political side notes galore. Thank you, I hope you enjoy. If you want to send me an email, you can email me at whydocountries.exist@gmail.com. First, you want to send your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Thank you, have a good rest of your day. The sources I used for this video are ANI Armenian Research Center's article, Struggle for Power in Nagorno Karabakh, The Death Murder of Artur Makchanian, Caspian Report's video, Armenian-Azerbaijani Skirmish and the Origins of the Nagorno-Karabakh Conflict, KarabakhFacts.com, the website, mountainouskarabakh.org, the Great Wars video, Transcaucasia in World War I, TRT World News video, Armenia and Azerbaijani Border Dispute Explained, and TRT World News documentary, Black Orchards, Azerbaijani and Armenian Wars, and Wikipedia.